Would you pretend to love a stranger for one weekend if you knew it might change both of your lives forever? The question drifted through the quiet woodworking shop with such unexpected sincerity that Ethan Walker almost believed he had imagined it. The steady rasp of sandpaper stopped in his hands as he slowly looked up from the cedar rocking chair resting on his workbench. Warm afternoon sunlight poured through the dusty windows, painting long golden lines across the wooden floor, while the familiar scent of fresh pine and sawdust filled the little shop that had become both his livelihood and his refuge. Standing in the doorway was a woman unlike anyone who had ever walked into his small business. She wore a simple navy dress beneath a light cream coat, comfortable leather shoes instead of expensive heels, and her long chestnut hair rested naturally across her shoulders. She was elegant without trying to be noticed, beautiful without appearing proud, and yet there was something in her blue eyes that spoke louder than any luxury ever could. She looked tired, not physically, but emotionally, as though success had become a burden too heavy to carry alone. Ethan carefully placed the sandpaper on the bench before offering the same warm smile he greeted every customer with. "Can I help you?" The woman hesitated, taking one slow breath before answering. "I hope so." Her voice was calm, but beneath it rested a quiet desperation that immediately caught his attention. She stepped farther inside, glancing around the shop filled with handcrafted tables, children's rocking horses, and unfinished cabinets waiting for patient hands. Family photographs decorated one wall beside drawings made with bright crayons, each one signed by a little girl named Lily. The woman smiled softly. "You built all of this?" Ethan nodded. "Everything except the drawings. Those belong to my daughter." Before another word could be spoken, a cheerful voice echoed from the small office in the back. "Daddy," Mrs. Collins called. She said the dining table is beautiful. Lily hurried into the workshop carrying a cordless phone almost as large as her hands. She stopped when she noticed the visitor, then smiled politely exactly as her father had taught her. "Hello." The woman smiled back. "Hello there." Ethan gently ruffled Lily's hair. "Sweetheart, could you finish your homework in the office for another few minutes?" Lily nodded without complaint and disappeared with a small wave. The woman watched the exchange in complete silence until the office door quietly closed again. "You are raising her alone?" she asked. Ethan's eyes softened. "For 7 years now." Another silence settled between them, broken only by the distant song of birds outside and the rhythmic ticking of an old clock hanging above the workshop door. Finally, the woman gathered enough courage to say the words she had clearly rehearsed many times before. "I need someone to pretend to be my date for one weekend." Ethan blinked once, unsure whether he had heard correctly. "I am sorry." She offered an embarrassed smile. "I know how strange that sounds." Ethan folded his arms comfortably, not suspicious, only curious. "May I ask why?" She lowered her eyes toward the wooden floor. "Because everyone in my life expects me to arrive with someone they can admire. I would rather arrive with someone I can respect." Ethan studied her face carefully. There was no arrogance, no manipulation. Only loneliness wrapped in remarkable composure. "You do not even know me," he said quietly. She finally looked back into his eyes. "That is exactly why I came." Outside, beyond the rows of maple trees lining the country road, a sleek black helicopter waited on a private field where its pilot checked the instruments one final time before departure. Ethan never glanced toward the distant horizon. He simply believed he was listening to a lonely woman asking for one honest favor. He had no idea that before the weekend ended, the quiet stranger standing inside his little woodworking shop would reveal a life so extraordinary that everyone around her treated her with awe, while she herself longed only to be treated like an ordinary human being. The next morning arrived beneath a sky washed clean by the cool colors of early autumn as Ethan locked the front door of his woodworking shop and placed a small canvas travel bag into the back seat of his old pickup truck. He had almost talked himself out of going twice before sunrise. It was not fear that held him back. It was responsibility. Every hour away from his shop meant work delayed, and every delayed project meant another family waiting for furniture they had trusted him to build. Yet every time he considered calling the woman to cancel, he remembered the loneliness hidden behind her calm smile. Some promises deserved to be kept simply because another human being needed them. Lily skipped across the front porch, carrying a paper bag with homemade oatmeal cookies. "These are for your friend," she said proudly. Ethan smiled. You have never even met her. Lily shrugged with the innocent confidence only children possess. You said she looked sad. Sad people need cookies. Ethan laughed quietly before placing the bag inside his travel pack. I think you might be right. A silver luxury sedan rolled slowly to the curb exactly at 8 o'clock. Ethan noticed the vehicle was far nicer than anything usually seen on his quiet street, but he assumed it belonged to a rental company serving visitors from the city. Olivia stepped out wearing comfortable blue jeans, a cream sweater, and simple walking shoes that made her appear far more like a schoolteacher than someone accustomed to extraordinary success. Good morning, she said with a warm smile. Good morning, Ethan replied. Lily hurried over and handed Olivia the paper bag. These are for you. Olivia accepted the gift with visible surprise. For me? Lily nodded. Daddy says sharing makes heavy days lighter. Olivia looked at Ethan before carefully holding the cookies against her chest. Thank you. I do not think anyone has given me homemade cookies in a very long time. After saying goodbye to Lily and promising to return before Monday evening, Ethan climbed into the passenger seat. The town slowly disappeared behind them as rolling farmland stretched toward distant hills painted with shades of gold, crimson, and amber. For nearly an hour they drove through peaceful countryside without speaking very much. The silence never felt uncomfortable. It felt earned. Finally, Ethan glanced toward Olivia. So what exactly happens this weekend? She kept both hands on the steering wheel. A family gathering at a lakeside resort. Big family. Very friendly. Olivia hesitated just long enough to answer honestly. Not always. Ethan nodded with quiet understanding. Families can be complicated. A faint smile appeared on Olivia's face. You are not asking the questions everyone else asks. Ethan looked out the window as old red barns slipped past beneath the clear blue sky. Should I be asking different ones? She laughed softly. Most people want to know what my family owns, where we vacation, or how successful we are. Ethan answered without looking away from the passing countryside. I was wondering what your favorite breakfast is. Olivia blinked in surprise before laughing again, this time more freely than before. Blueberry pancakes. Ethan smiled. Good choice. Lily prefers chocolate chips. I usually lose that argument. Another hour passed before the peaceful highways gave way to beautifully landscaped roads lined with towering maple trees and elegant stone gates. As the resort finally appeared beside the sparkling lake, Ethan let out a quiet whistle. The grand buildings reflected across the calm water, while perfectly trimmed gardens surrounded winding pathways filled with late blooming flowers. Luxury vehicles rested near the entrance, and uniformed attendants greeted arriving guests with polished professionalism. Ethan adjusted the collar of his plaid shirt and picked up his modest travel bag. Well, he said with an easy smile, this is definitely a little fancier than my workshop. Olivia looked at him carefully, almost searching for discomfort or insecurity. She found neither. Instead, she found the same calm kindness that had welcomed her into his little shop the day before. And for the first time in many years, she stepped toward her family's world, hoping that someone beside her would not be impressed by its wealth, but would simply remain exactly who he already was. The grand lobby welcomed them with polished marble floors, towering windows overlooking the lake, and the soft melody of a piano drifting through the afternoon air. Fresh, white lilies filled crystal vases near the entrance, while guests in tailored suits and elegant dresses moved gracefully between quiet conversations. Ethan paused for only a moment, taking in the beauty of the place before smiling to himself. Someone put a great deal of care into building this, he said. Olivia looked at him with quiet surprise. Most visitors noticed the luxury first. Ethan noticed the craftsmanship. You are looking at the woodwork, she observed. He nodded. Every beam tells a story. Whoever designed this place wanted people to feel welcome before they ever reached the front desk. Olivia followed his eyes toward the vaulted ceiling. She had visited the resort many times over the years, yet she had never thought about the people whose hands had built it. Before she could answer, a cheerful attendant approached with 2 room keys. Welcome back, Miss Bennett. Ethan smiled politely, assuming she had simply stayed there before. Olivia accepted the keys with a brief thank you and quietly led him toward the elevators. As the doors opened onto the private guest floor, another attendant greeted her by name with respectful familiarity. Ethan noticed the warmth in the greeting but thought nothing of it. To him, kindness usually returned to those who offered it freely. A few minutes later, they entered a spacious suite overlooking the lake where autumn leaves danced across the water beneath the afternoon sun. Ethan set his modest canvas bag beside the sofa and walked toward the balcony. "That is one incredible view," he said softly. Olivia joined him. "It always reminds me to slow down." He smiled without turning around. "Maybe that is why people come here." A gentle knock interrupted the peaceful moment. "Olivia." A woman's excited voice echoed from the hallway before the suite door opened. Margaret Bennett stepped inside with open arms, embracing Olivia warmly before noticing Ethan standing near the balcony doors. Her smile remained gracious, though curiosity flickered across her face. "You must be Ethan." He offered a respectful handshake. "It is a pleasure to meet you, ma'am." Margaret returned the handshake, immediately noticing the rough calluses. "Earned through years of honest work. Olivia has told us very little about you." Ethan chuckled. "There is not much to tell. I build furniture and try not to disappoint my daughter." Margaret's expression softened. "Sometimes those are the most important things a man can do." Before another conversation could begin, another guest entered without knocking. Daniel Prescott carried himself with polished confidence, his tailored charcoal suit fitting as perfectly as the practiced smile resting on his face. He shook Olivia's hand before briefly glancing toward Ethan. "So this is the mystery guest." Ethan extended his hand. "Ethan Walker." Daniel accepted it politely, but his eyes quickly drifted toward Ethan's worn leather boots. "And what exactly do you do?" "I own a woodworking shop." Daniel nodded slowly. "Interesting." The single word carried enough quiet judgment to fill the room. "Custom furniture?" "Mostly." "Business doing well?" Ethan answered honestly. "Well enough to keep food on the table and a roof over my daughter's head." Daniel smiled, though there was little warmth behind it. "Ambitious goals?" Ethan simply returned the smile. "They are important goals." Margaret noticed the exchange without saying a word. Olivia noticed it too, and disappointment briefly crossed her face. Daniel had done exactly what she feared someone would do. He had measured Ethan before learning anything about him. Yet Ethan showed no irritation, no embarrassment, and no desire to defend himself. Instead, he turned toward the window where the late afternoon sun reflected across the calm lake. "Your family chose a beautiful place to gather," he said quietly. Daniel looked at him with mild confusion. "You are changing the subject." Ethan shook his head gently. "No, I am choosing the one that makes everyone happier." For the first time since arriving at the resort, complete silence settled across the room, and even Daniel seemed uncertain how to respond to a man who refused to compete in a conversation built on pride. That evening, the family gathered on the broad lakeside terrace where strings of warm lights stretched between old oak trees and the scent of cedar smoke drifted gently from elegant stone fireplaces. The calm water reflected the last colors of sunset, while a jazz trio filled the cool autumn air with quiet melodies that never competed with conversation. Ethan adjusted the sleeves of his blue plaid shirt and followed Olivia toward the gathering without the slightest trace of nervousness. He had attended school plays, church picnics, and neighborhood cookouts for years. To him, people remained people no matter how expensive the surroundings became. Olivia noticed his calm and wished she possessed even half of it. As guests exchanged greetings, Ethan quietly stepped aside when he noticed an elderly gentleman struggling to balance a wooden cane while carrying a cup of coffee. "May I help you?" he asked with an easy smile. The gentleman accepted gratefully, and together they crossed the terrace at an unhurried pace. "Thank you, son," the older man said. "My knees are not what they used to be." Ethan chuckled. "Mine remind me every morning that I am almost 40. The two men laughed together before Ethan wished him a pleasant evening and returned to Olivia's side. Daniel Prescott had watched the entire exchange from across the terrace. He approached carrying 2 sparkling waters before offering one to Olivia. "You certainly found someone unusual," he said. Olivia accepted the glass politely. "That is true." Daniel turned toward Ethan. "Tell me something, Ethan. If you could wake up tomorrow with unlimited money, what would be the first thing you would buy?" Several nearby guests grew noticeably quieter. Ethan considered the question for a moment before answering. "Time." Daniel laughed softly. "Time is not for sale." Ethan nodded. "Exactly. That is why it is more valuable than money." The laughter around them faded. Daniel tried again. "Surely there is a dream car or vacation you have always wanted." Ethan smiled gently. My daughter wants to visit Yellowstone National Park one day. I would rather save for that than buy something that spends most of its life parked in a garage. Olivia looked toward him without speaking. Every answer he gave somehow made the conversation less about possessions and more about people. A waiter, carrying a tray of desserts, suddenly lost his footing on the edge of the stone path. Before the tray could slide completely from his hands, Ethan stepped forward and steadied it with one smooth movement. "Easy," he said warmly. "Looks like the stones are a little uneven here." The young waiter let out a relieved breath. "Thank you, sir. I almost ruined the evening." Ethan shook his head. Nobody remembers a perfect dinner. They remember how people treated one another. The waiter smiled with genuine gratitude before continuing on his way. Margaret Bennett observed everything from only a few feet away. She leaned toward her sister and whispered, "Have you noticed something?" Her sister nodded. "He never looks around to see who is watching." Margaret smiled thoughtfully. "That is because kindness is already part of him." Daniel folded his arms, growing increasingly frustrated by the quiet respect Ethan seemed to earn without asking for it. He had expected awkwardness, insecurity, perhaps even admiration for the wealthy guests surrounding them. Instead, he found a man completely comfortable with himself. As the evening breeze rippled across the lake and the music softened into silence between songs, more conversations quietly turned toward Ethan. Yet none of them centered on his profession or his clothes anymore. They centered on the calm dignity that seemed to follow him wherever he walked. And for the first time since the weekend began, Olivia realized that the greatest impression Ethan was making had nothing to do with pretending to belong in her world. Without trying, he was gently changing it. Sunday morning unfolded beneath a clear autumn sky as gentle mist drifted above the quiet lake, and the first rays of sunlight painted the water in shades of gold and silver. Most of the resort remained peacefully asleep after the previous evening's gathering, but Ethan had been awake long before sunrise. Years of raising Lily had made early mornings feel natural, and the habit followed him wherever he went. He left the suite quietly, carrying nothing more than a cup of black coffee and a light jacket as he wandered toward the wooden dock where the cool breeze carried the scent of pine and fresh water. Along the shoreline, he noticed one of the resort's maintenance employees kneeling beside a loose section of decorative wooden fencing that had shifted after several days of strong wind. The man struggled to hold the heavy rail in place while reaching for his tools. Ethan set his coffee on a nearby bench and walked over with an easy smile. "Need another pair of hands?" The worker looked up with relief. "If you have a minute, I would appreciate it." Ethan held the beam steady while offering a simple suggestion about adjusting the angle before tightening the support bolts. Within a few minutes, the fence stood perfectly straight again. "You saved me at least half an hour," the employee said gratefully. Ethan brushed the sawdust from his hands and smiled. "Someone once taught me that good work always becomes easier when two people carry it together." Unknown to him, Olivia had stepped onto her private balcony moments earlier. She had expected to find a quiet place to organize her thoughts before another long day with family. But instead, she found herself watching Ethan help a complete stranger without expecting recognition, gratitude, or reward. There were no guests nearby, no cameras, and no audience to impress. It was simply who he was. Later that morning, the family hosted a charity brunch in the resort gardens to support a local youth education program. Children from nearby schools performed music while guests enjoyed breakfast beneath white canopies surrounded by colorful autumn flowers. During the performance, a young girl carrying a violin stopped just before reaching the small stage. Her hands trembled, and tears filled her eyes as she stared at the waiting audience. Ethan quietly stepped away from his table and knelt beside her. "First performance?" he asked gently. She nodded. "I am scared." Ethan smiled with quiet understanding. "My daughter gets nervous before every school presentation." The little girl looked at him hopefully. "What does she do?" Ethan answered softly. "She takes one slow breath and remembers that people are not hoping she fails. They are hoping she shines." The child smiled through her tears before walking onto the stage with renewed courage. Moments later, beautiful violin music floated across the gardens while the audience applauded warmly at the final note. Ethan had already returned to his seat before anyone realized where he had been. Olivia watched him from across the garden, unable to take her eyes away. Every successful man she had known had wanted to be admired. Ethan seemed happiest when nobody noticed him at all. Daniel Prescott eventually approached her carrying a cup of coffee. "Your guest is becoming quite popular," he remarked with a forced smile. Olivia looked toward Ethan, who was now laughing with an elderly couple beneath a maple tree. "He is not trying to be," she answered quietly. Daniel shrugged. "People like simple stories." Olivia slowly shook her head. "No, they recognized genuine hearts." Margaret Bennett overheard the exchange and followed Olivia's gaze toward Ethan. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Around them, the gardens remained filled with elegant conversations, expensive watches, and influential people. Yet somehow the man wearing the least expensive clothes had quietly become the person everyone respected most. Without realizing it, Ethan had already given Olivia something she had been searching for far longer than either of them understood. He had reminded her that the rarest kind of wealth is found not in the size of a fortune, but in the quiet character of a person who never needs the world to applaud before choosing to do what is right. Sunday afternoon brought a quiet change to the atmosphere around the resort as luxury sedans rolled through the front gates one after another, and additional security staff greeted arriving executives with practiced efficiency. Guests who had spent the morning enjoying the charity brunch gradually exchanged relaxed conversations for polished business discussions. Ethan noticed the subtle transformation but thought little of it. To him, every gathering eventually turned into work for someone. Olivia walked beside him through the marble corridor leading toward the grand ballroom, her pace slower than usual. She looked as though she wanted to say something important, yet every attempt dissolved into thoughtful silence. Before either of them spoke, Daniel Prescott approached wearing another perfectly tailored suit and an expression of quiet confidence. "The board has arrived," he said to Olivia. "Everyone is waiting for you." She nodded gently. "I will be there in a moment." Daniel glanced toward Ethan. "The executive session is private. I am sure you understand." Ethan smiled politely. "Of course. I can enjoy the lake while the important people work." Daniel hesitated before speaking again, his voice carrying just enough volume for several nearby guests to overhear. "Perhaps it is time he understands exactly who you are." Olivia's expression immediately tightened. "Daniel." He ignored the warning. "Ethan, the woman standing beside you is not simply attending this meeting. She is the chairwoman and chief executive officer of Bennett Technologies. Every executive inside that ballroom reports directly to her. The company she leads is worth billions of dollars." The hallway became remarkably quiet. Conversations faded. Several board members paused in place. Margaret Bennett slowly turned toward Ethan, watching him with gentle curiosity. Olivia held her breath. For years, she had witnessed the same moment repeated over and over again. Surprise, excitement, awkward compliments, careful calculations. She waited for Ethan to become another chapter in that familiar story. Instead, he looked at Olivia with the same calm eyes that had welcomed her into his woodworking shop. "So that is why everyone keeps calling you Miss Bennett," he said with a faint smile. Daniel frowned. "Is that all you have to say?" Ethan looked back at him kindly. "Should there be more?" Daniel folded his arms. "Most people would be overwhelmed." Ethan shook his head. "Yesterday, she was still the woman who accepted homemade cookies from my daughter with genuine gratitude. Today, she is the same woman. Learning her title does not change her character." The silence deepened. Olivia searched his face, almost unable to believe what she was hearing. "You are not upset that I never told you?" she asked softly. Ethan answered without hesitation. "You asked me to spend a weekend helping someone through a difficult family gathering. I agreed because I respected the person standing in front of me, not because I needed to know everything about her life." Margaret lowered her eyes with a quiet smile, while several executives exchanged thoughtful glances. Daniel seemed determined to recover the conversation. Surely knowing she controls that kind of wealth changes something. Ethan looked toward the ballroom doors before answering in the same steady voice. "Money changes what people can buy. It does not decide who deserves kindness." No one spoke after that. Even Daniel found himself without another argument. Olivia felt a weight she had carried for years quietly begin to disappear. For the first time in a very long time, someone had looked beyond the title, beyond the fortune, beyond every expectation attached to her name, and simply seen a woman who had once walked into a small woodworking shop, hoping one honest stranger might help her through a lonely weekend. Ethan gently reached for the ballroom door and held it open with effortless courtesy. "After you," he said warmly. Olivia smiled, stepped inside to lead one of the most successful companies in America, and realized that the greatest privilege she had found that weekend was not meeting someone impressed by her success, but meeting someone whose quiet dignity could never be purchased by it. The board meeting continued well into the late afternoon, while the sun slowly drifted toward the western hills beyond the lake, bathing the resort grounds in soft amber light. Ethan spent those hours exactly as he had promised. Instead of wandering through luxury boutiques or admiring expensive cars, he borrowed a history book from the resort library and found a quiet bench overlooking the water. Every so often he paused to watch families walking together along the shoreline or children laughing as they tossed bread to ducks gathering near the wooden dock. Peace had always been easier for him to recognize than prestige. When the ballroom doors finally opened, executives emerged discussing quarterly strategies, international expansion, and shareholder confidence. Olivia walked among them with calm authority, answering questions with thoughtful precision before politely excusing herself. The moment she stepped outside and spotted Ethan sitting beneath a maple tree with a closed book resting on his lap, the tension slowly disappeared from her face. She crossed the lawn toward him, and he stood with the same warm smile he had offered her the first day they met. "How did everything go?" he asked. Olivia laughed quietly. "Exactly the way board meetings usually go. Too many charts and not enough fresh air." Ethan smiled. "Then I think you earned both." Together they began walking along the quiet lakeside path where the evening breeze carried the scent of pine needles and cool water. For several minutes neither of them felt the need to speak. The silence no longer belonged to strangers. It belonged to two people who had slowly learned to trust it. Finally, Olivia stopped beside the railing overlooking the lake. "Ethan," she said softly, "what happens after tomorrow?" He looked toward the water where the setting sun reflected like liquid gold across the gentle waves. "I drive home. Lily reminds me I promised pancakes before school. I finish the dining table for Mrs. Collins. Life becomes ordinary again." Olivia lowered her eyes. "I do not want this to become ordinary." Ethan turned toward her, sensing the honesty behind every word. "What are you saying?" She took a slow breath. "I would like to see you again. Not because of our agreement. Not because I needed someone for this weekend. Because somewhere between your daughter's cookies, the quiet mornings, and the way you treat people, I remembered the kind of person I always hoped I might meet." Ethan remained silent for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Olivia, I am honored." He smiled gently before continuing. "But I think you deserve someone who belongs in your world." She immediately shook her head. "Who decided it is my world?" Ethan looked toward the grand resort behind them where elegant lights had begun glowing beneath the coming twilight. "The responsibilities you carry are extraordinary. Thousands of families depend on your decisions. My life is measured differently. My biggest concern tomorrow morning is making sure an 8-year-old remembers her spelling words." Olivia stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "And that is exactly why I admire you." Ethan's expression softened with quiet gratitude. Admiration is a beautiful beginning, but life asks much harder questions than admiration. Before Olivia could answer, Margaret Bennett approached along the stone path with an understanding smile. She had not intended to interrupt, yet she sensed the importance of the moment unfolding before her. "May I borrow Ethan for just 1 minute?" she asked. Olivia nodded quietly. Margaret turned toward him. "I have spent my entire life watching people become interested in my family's name long before they became interested in our hearts. You have done the opposite." "Thank you." Ethan smiled with genuine humility. "Your daughter made trusting a stranger very easy." Margaret looked toward Olivia standing peacefully beside the lake and then back at Ethan. "Whether you realize it or not, you have already given her something that no business achievement ever could." Ethan followed her gaze toward Olivia as the last light of day shimmered across the water. He did not answer because no words seemed necessary. Sometimes the deepest truths arrived without applause, carried quietly by the evening wind, waiting for two hearts to discover that they had already begun walking toward the same future. Monday morning greeted Ethan with crisp autumn air and the comforting rhythm of familiar routines as he drove his old pickup truck back toward the small town he had always called home. The luxury of the lakeside resort gradually disappeared behind winding country roads lined with golden fields, weathered fences, and maple trees beginning to surrender their colorful leaves. He felt grateful for the weekend, yet relieved to return to the simple life waiting for him. Before 7 o'clock, he was already standing in his kitchen flipping blueberry pancakes, while Lily sat at the table, practicing her spelling words between cheerful bites of breakfast. "Did your friend have a better weekend?" she asked with innocent curiosity. Ethan smiled as he poured warm maple syrup onto her plate. "I think she did." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "Then the cookies worked." Ethan laughed quietly. "I think they helped more than either of us expected." Nearly 200 miles away, Olivia sat inside the executive boardroom of Bennett Technologies, surrounded by polished glass walls, digital presentation screens, and senior executives discussing billion-dollar decisions with practiced confidence. She listened carefully, offered thoughtful answers, and guided every conversation with calm authority, yet her mind repeatedly wandered somewhere entirely different. She remembered Ethan steadying the dessert tray before it could fall, encouraging the frightened little violin player, helping the maintenance worker before sunrise, and speaking to every employee with the same respect he offered directors and executives. Finally, she closed the presentation folder resting before her. "We will continue the remaining agenda tomorrow morning," she said gently. Several executives exchanged surprised glances. Daniel Prescott looked up from his notes. "We still have 2 strategic reviews scheduled this afternoon." Olivia smiled politely. "They can wait one day." Without another explanation, she gathered her coat, thanked everyone for their work, and quietly left the building. 3 hours later, a silver sport utility vehicle rolled slowly into Ethan's quiet neighborhood beneath a bright blue afternoon sky. There were no security vehicles following behind, no assistants carrying briefcases, and no photographers waiting nearby. Olivia stepped out wearing blue jeans, a soft cream sweater, and comfortable walking shoes that blended naturally into the peaceful surroundings. Ethan looked up from the workbench inside his shop, surprised to see her standing in the open doorway with the same warm smile she had worn when they first met. "I thought you would be in another meeting," he said. Olivia laughed softly. "I was. Then I realized there was somewhere I would rather be." Before Ethan could answer, the front door of the house opened, and Lily ran outside carrying a small paintbrush covered in bright blue paint. Her face immediately lit up. "You came back." Olivia knelt beside her with genuine happiness. "I did." Lily reached for her hand without hesitation. "Do you want to see my treehouse?" Olivia glanced toward Ethan, uncertain whether she should accept. He smiled warmly. If Lily invites someone to the treehouse, it means they are important. Together they walked into the backyard where a handmade wooden treehouse stood beneath an old maple tree whose branches danced gently in the afternoon breeze. A simple rope swing moved slowly beside it while colorful birdhouses decorated the fence Ethan had built years earlier. Lily climbed halfway up the ladder before turning around proudly. "Daddy built all of this." Olivia looked around the modest backyard filled with laughter instead of luxury, memories instead of marble, and peace instead of pressure. She suddenly understood why Ethan had never seemed impressed by extraordinary wealth. Every treasure that mattered most to him was already standing within a few feet. As Lily laughed from the little treehouse above them, Olivia quietly turned toward Ethan. "I spent years building one of the most successful companies in the country," she said softly. "But somewhere along the way I forgot how to build a home." Ethan looked at the little girl smiling from the window of the treehouse before answering with quiet certainty. "The wonderful thing about homes is that they are never built all at once. They are built one kind day at a time." For a long moment neither of them spoke as golden sunlight filtered gently through the autumn leaves. And in that peaceful silence Olivia realized she had finally arrived at the place she had unknowingly been searching for all along. 1 year passed with the quiet certainty that seasons always return, and on a bright Saturday afternoon the small town welcomed its annual autumn community festival beneath a sky painted with deep blue and drifting white clouds. Maple leaves covered the sidewalks like patches of gold, while local musicians played cheerful songs from the wooden gazebo at the center of the park. Handmade craft booths lined the walking paths, children laughed beside pumpkin displays, and the familiar aroma of fresh apple pie and cinnamon drifted through the crisp air. Ethan had donated a handcrafted oak bench for the annual charity raffle, just as he quietly donated something every year without asking for recognition. He wore the same blue plaid shirt, the same worn leather boots, and the same easy smile that had never changed. Beside him, Lily proudly arranged small wooden birdhouses she had painted herself, greeting every visitor with the same kindness her father had taught her. A silver sport utility vehicle slowly pulled into the parking area, and Olivia stepped out wearing comfortable jeans, a soft cream sweater, and a light brown jacket that blended perfectly with the colors of autumn. There were no assistants, no security detail, and no photographers. She had stopped bringing her business world with her months ago. She walked across the park carrying a basket filled with homemade blueberry muffins she had baked herself after asking Lily for the recipe over the phone earlier that week. Lily spotted her first and ran forward with joyful excitement. "You made them." Olivia laughed as she handed over the basket. "I hope they taste half as good as yours." Ethan watched the two of them together with quiet gratitude, realizing that the distance separating their lives 1 year earlier had slowly disappeared, not through dramatic promises or expensive gifts, but through countless ordinary moments shared with honesty and patience. Later that afternoon, the mayor announced the winner of the Community Service Recognition Award, an honor chosen each year by local residents rather than town officials. To Ethan's complete surprise, his name was called. Confused applause quickly grew into warm cheers as neighbors smiled toward the quiet carpenter who had spent years repairing porches for elderly couples, building wheelchair ramps without charge, donating handmade furniture to families in need, and never once mentioning any of it. Embarrassed by the attention, Ethan slowly walked onto the small wooden stage where the mayor handed him a simple framed certificate. "Would you like to say a few words?" the mayor asked. Ethan looked across the crowd until his eyes rested on Lily and Olivia, standing together near the front. He smiled softly before speaking. "I do not think kindness belongs to one person. Every good thing I have ever done was first taught to me by someone else. My parents taught me to work honestly. My daughter reminds me every day that generosity can fit inside a paper bag of homemade cookies. And someone very special reminded me that titles, success, and money matter far less than the way we treat the people standing beside us." His words settled gently across the park. No one hurried to clap. No one interrupted the silence. Even the children seemed to pause as the autumn breeze carried the final sentence through the rows of maple trees. Olivia quietly reached for Ethan's hand, and this time he held hers without hesitation. Margaret Bennett, who had quietly driven into town to attend the festival, watched from the edge of the crowd with grateful eyes. She understood something the rest of the audience was only beginning to discover. Ethan had never changed Olivia by asking her to leave her successful life behind. Olivia had never changed Ethan by offering him wealth or influence. Instead, they had changed each other by proving that genuine respect grows wherever humility, grace, and second chances are given room to flourish. As the evening sun settled behind the hills and golden light covered the little town, Ethan, Olivia, and Lily walked slowly together beneath the falling autumn leaves toward the quiet streets that now felt like home to all three of them. And in that peaceful moment, everyone watching finally understood that the richest life is never measured by what a person owns, but by the hearts they help feel safe enough to belong.